Opportunity too is to connect the dots between, you know, not only these sort of micropayments strategies that are emerging, but also you look at proximity, the relationship between, you know, I am smarter, I know what I'm purchasing, I know what's around me. I mean, there are significant opportunities, I think, in the startup space to be able to connect that sort of layer focused company with these micro merchants evolving, because those together create more currency and more value.
Okay, we have somebody in the back here.
Ori Okola from Sheedy. It seems to me that if we're talking about the future of currency, we're missing that 3 billion that doesn't have credit cards. Yeah. And I'm sort of surprised that we spent almost 45 minutes with the top people in payment systems without touching on how do we get that 500 million and growing user base of Facebook paying virtual currency, maybe with mobile phone, but without credit cards. For instance, in China, what you're seeing is people being able to use prepaid cards to pay for virtual goods. You know, PayPal, I'd be really interested. I know you've recently done a partnership in South Africa, but correct me if I'm wrong, if you look at where most of the hacking and sort of the risk in terms of hackers and those sorts of things, it's not traffic doesn't come, it's mostly Russia or China, and yet as Africa we're penalized from a perception really rather than looking at transactions that are really hacked, and we're not allowed to conduct e-commerce. And that's a huge potential if you're looking in terms of consumers and numbers. And what are you doing then? You've spoken, you have IP technology, risk models. Can you talk a little bit about where Africa and other parts of the world that I think are being unfairly penalized from a perception point of view fit into that?
We actually did touch on that very briefly, but not enough. So
absolutely. Also South America, I would tell you, we're going into Brazil and places like that. And you mentioned credit cards, but actually what PayPal, when I said virtual wallet, we're trying to take everything into account. So, you know, stored value, we have a thing we do with Green Dot where you can bring money into the system. So again, you're right, there is a lot of penalization in developing countries where maybe it's not all coming from. Most of our work is done, we have a company we bought a number of years ago called, I forgot the name of it. It came out of Israel, but it's focused on doing modeling based on IP and trends and so on. And we deploy all of those things as part of the backbone when we go into the thing we did in South Africa and so on.
I want to say, I think credit cards is actually a small part of the whole conversation we've had this morning.
It is.
Right. So
but I think the point is a really good one, and I think that whatever the platform is that supports the transactions of this new evolving currency, it has to be inclusive. It has to be open, because, you know, this cannot,
and it has
by
to
its
do
nature,
micropayments.
Right.
Yeah, and so by its nature, that's the need that we all have to solve against.
And while there's 1 billion people in Africa, and I think the payment systems in Africa generally are undeveloped, even in the United States, 20% of the adult population is underbanked. Yep. And it may surprise you. So in our business, the fastest growing portion of our core business is in prepaid cards, increasingly issued by employers, so that they're not issuing a check to an employee and then they go to a check cashing location that's dangerous and expensive. They're getting a branded card that they can go online with and shop. Yep. There are benefits coming from state governments, unemployment benefits, child care
again, we want to go beyond cards.
Yeah, I mean, look at this.
You know.
I mean, there's no carriers represented up here, so I'll play that role just because we partner with them. But I mean, look at how many people are in the world today? 6 billion?
Close to
something like that?
6.8.
So almost everyone in the world has a cell phone, short of about 1 billion.
Yeah.
About 2 billion bank accounts. Are banks going to close that gap? No, they're not. Now, they can get close with alternative payment products like prepaid cards and this sort of thing. But, I mean, the carriers are in the best position to actually facilitate these transactions. And whether or not they get their act together and do it is up to them. But they've got a couple things going for them. They've got already widespread, near full distribution across the entire globe. They've got a unique numbering system in the service ID where everyone who has a phone has a unique number on the network.
The problem is they have carrier DNA.
Well, that's part of it, but they've got a good start.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
But I think that's why.
I think we have a. Wait, we need a microphone. So the next person with a.
I'll do
All
a
right.
quick question so
Yeah.
you can jump in.
Yeah, let me just jump in. Zong,
What's
you
your
probably,
name, please?
I'm Quentin Hardy with Forbes. You probably know EasyTop out of Ireland. They allow people to top up other people's phones trans-border. And as you say, minutes are turning into currency. I think it's worth noting that most of these phones you talk about are prepaid. And for people inside that area, the phone means a lot more because there's an urgency about running down. So there are already payments going on from, say, Abu Dhabi to India in the form of topping up other people's phones so your mom can call more. It's a big business among migrants now. New Yorkers will send money down to Haiti that way. And I think the part that may be emerging is paying people that way for value they might have. Say, some geotagging information people in Dhaka could provide to Google, and their reward is 2 or 3 minutes of airtime. So you're seeing alternative currencies in terms of that time
That's
horizon.
a good point.
Yeah, thank you. And you had a question?
Yeah, this wasn't really addressed. I'm coming
name?
from the philanthropic world. I'm Cameron Sinclair. What I wanted to note is, I think the work that international development is doing, especially small NGOs, is more on the cutting edge of financing, because we have to be as nimble as possible. So for myself, 95% of our donations come through online giving. It's usually PayPal or mobile. Almost never we get a check. So this is a new. One thing that really struck me is a few weeks ago, David Cameron in the UK suggested an idea of tapping dormant accounts to fund charitable work. These accounts are 15 years old. It's about $500 million worth of funding. And in stressed economies, is there a philanthropic opportunity for each of the people up on the panel to do similar work, looking at your back history and say, look, we have all these dormant accounts. There's an opportunity to turn around and say, this can fund some social issues.
I don't know if as an organization we've looked at that particular issue, but I tell you, I think that the idea of microfinance is a huge part of what we do think about, because we do know that micro lending and access into the emerging markets is such a big part of the growth of those emerging economies. But I don't have any. It's a very interesting idea, but at this point I don't have a point of view at Citi that we would go that way.
You caught him flat-footed.
Yeah, thank you.
There are cheat laws.
Yeah, that's
in the
the
United
issue.
States.
Yeah.
That money actually remains the property of the owner.
Right.
And the governments, state governments, have laws
Yeah.
which basically require that money be paid to them. Sorry,
Mr. Lawyer.
to be held for the benefit of the ultimate owner. So you have an issue to get over.
That is the issue.
So I'm trying to be an honest broker here. We have gone over our time, and I've been told that may or may not matter. So do we have anybody here from Techonomy who could keep going? I hear keep going. All right. And the next person, I've got a question right here.
Yes, my name is Peter Van from Swift from Brussels. I find that the discussion is a bit getting narrowed down. You got it pretty sharp in the beginning when you said it's an instrument of trust in a transaction, but it's really narrows down to a payment transaction, the whole discussion. So I would like that you elaborate a little bit on how do you mix in social graph and how I, as an owner of my social graph, I can sell my stuff to you and not buying stuff from somebody else, and how you bring in identity in that picture, and not identity as authentication, but identity as digital footprint, and how that has value.
Chris, is that a Bill?
So, I can tell you how we use, obviously Facebook is an interesting ecosystem. I hate to keep going back to it, but it's interesting because it's large and it's real identity that's tied to it. And anyone who's running transactions across that network is likely logging that ID. And we use it, in all of our anti-fraud algorithms. We use it to understand, purchase behaviors and this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the purpose of the currency is to facilitate that transaction. And so, I don't know. I think we've covered a lot of the topics that, that deal with that.
But identity, I think we could spend a whole nother hour on it. It's a great point, though, because as the social networks and the online payments and all these things come together and more partnership starts to happen, that is a rapidly changing field where people are starting to have that trusted identity that, and Facebook Connect is one of the things that's happening, but it's happening all over the place. And it's certainly a big part of what we're looking at is how do you have that trusted identity? You know, you're in, now you can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that you're on track. I mean, there are going to be many more levels where people are exchanging something, not necessarily money. It could be time, it could be effort, it could be travel, it could be eco-travel, it could make a list, right?
Yeah.
The virtual
put
barter
their kids
system.
in an internship program in Africa. There are so many different human hours now being spent that way that clearly it's beyond a normal currency. And I think that they use things like Facebook and the net in general to find these opportunities. So one of the great aggregator or integrator opportunities, I think, is helping that happen. Any kind of enabling technology or sites which help young kids in college do internships, that's a really active area. People who have social interests find ways to spend that extra hour a day. That's what's needed, I think, and there's a lot of use there for alternative currencies and for integration. Here we go. Yes.
Jody Westby with Global Cyber Risk. There's a huge legal policy component to all of this, and your trust that you're talking about basically stems from our consumer protection laws, and people feel comfortable that they're not going to get burned. But as we know, the cyber criminals know how to game the system. And so when you have organized crime now, its sophistication in cybercrime has really dramatically risen over the last year. So it's almost a perfect crime. It's very difficult to get caught. And so there's not just the consumers, but there are the businesses. Mm-hmm. And so this is what's happening now with wire transfer fraud, where businesses are having hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, fraudulently taken out of their bank accounts, and especially through the automated clearinghouse system. And frankly, the banks are taking advantage of that framework and saying, sorry, you didn't notify us within 48 hours, we don't have to give you your money back. This has happened to cities, it's happened to a number of cities, I mean, the cities that, Indianapolis, for example.
Okay. So the question is?
To small business. So the question is, what are you guys going to do? The first thing, do you have plans to have maybe a global policy of how you treat consumers? And do you have plans to address this huge gap with business fraud and wire fraud transfers?
I think this is a really important point. Payments and commerce, these are not commodities, right? And you have tools like the ACH, like wire transfers, that were built in order for known parties to transact with one another. And because they are low cost, they are also low functionality, certain environments will migrate to them in order to drop transactions down. And if you're one node in the payment seam and you say, well, I can do that and it's low cost to me, and if the consumer or the intermediaries along the way don't appreciate the risks that they're taking on, then it undermines trust. And I think Reg E, Reg Z, these are important domestically. At a branded level, it's very important to us. We promote aggressively, as do other brands, zero liability. And we stand behind that irrespective of whether or not you notify us in 2 days or 2 months. So I think that to reinforce that payments and commerce are not commodities, and that in particular when you've got folks in these environments, be they virtual or real world, coming together and they don't know each other, that the protections are absolutely critical.
Yes.